Hi everyone, I'm Mark Wasilio. I'm the MLA for Fort Garry, and welcome to our 11th episode on the Ledge podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to all things provincial politics. It's a special episode on the pod. We're talking election reform, namely lowering the voting age to 16 in Manitoba and allowing permanent residents the right to vote. We are seeing major jurisdictions around the world changing their voting rights to allow 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote. And we ask the question, has it time come for Manitoba? Our province is built on immigration. We've seen an explosion of newcomers in Manitoba in the last 10 years, and they make up a sizable part of the population. In my riding of Fort Garry alone, 1 in 3 people are newcomers. We are joined today on the pod by Carolina Meneses Zamora from the Immigration Partnership Winnipeg to talk about voting rights and giving permanent residents the right to vote in Manitoba. And to set the stage, we'll talk about my Bill 211, the Voter Eligibility Act. It was debated last week in the House, and it would change the law, lowering the voting age to 16 in municipal elections and allow permanent residents the right to vote. So lots to cover. Let's get into it. So as an independent member of the legislature, I'm allowed to introduce one bill a year or legislative session that's guaranteed to be debated on the House floor and go to a vote. This year, I tabled Bill 211, the Local Elections Voter Eligibility Act. So what is this bill? What does it do? And why does it matter? Now, the idea for this bill started well over 10 years ago when I was chair of the board for the Winnipeg School Division. A group of Winnipeg activists from the newcomer community, including Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, approached the Winnipeg School Division seeking changes into the local municipal election law. At the time, there was about 80,000 permanent residents in the city of Winnipeg. Those people live their entire lives here, send their children to our schools, buy homes, they pay property taxes, and they pay education property taxes, but get no say in their children's school or how their property taxes are spent. And some of the newcomers' arguments certainly resonated with me, and I am the son of a newcomer. My mother came here as a refugee after World War II. Now, I also have the experience of holding budget open houses for the Winnipeg School Division community. And at these open houses, you would have senior high school students who attend and would share what their schools needed and what was a funding priority for them. This was, as a politician, invaluable information. I think many politicians rarely ask, including school trustees, what high school students think about their schools and what would actually make them better. After all, they're the primary users of the schools. They're the clients, and they very much have an opinion. And I was blown away at the quality of their advocacy, the maturity of their opinions, and the thoughtfulness of their ideas. And, you get to wondering, why don't they actually have a say in how their schools are being run? And why aren't politicians canvassing the very people who use the services they provide? So now we fast forward to 2025. I'm now in a position as an MLA to actually make changes to the law. So I drafted and brought forward Bill 211. In short, what the bill does is lower the voting age for municipal elections in Manitoba to 16 years old. And it also would lower the voting age for municipal council elections. So, for example, the city of Winnipeg. And it gives permanent residents, for the first time in Canada, as far as I know, the right to vote in local municipal elections. So this isn't happening anywhere, and quite frankly, I think its time has come. The other important fact here is since I left the Winnipeg School Division, immigration has exploded in Winnipeg. Some estimates I'm hearing now, the city of Winnipeg alone has 170,000 permanent residents. So the world is changing. And the right to vote based on age basically is an arbitrary number that's changed over time, and it's been lowered throughout history. So here's some context. Manitoba used to have a voting age of 21, and it was lowered in 1969 to 18. In fact, it happened first here in Manitoba before it happened in Canada. In Canada, the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18 in 1970. So our province actually was a leader in this area. And keep in mind, we allow young people to drive a vehicle at age 16, even though it's one of the leading causes of death in the country and is inherently apparently a very dangerous activity. And in Manitoba, you can buy alcohol at 18, but in Ontario, it's 19. We've set the age for buying marijuana at 19. In the U.S., they don't even trust young people to legally consume alcohol until 21. And many parts of the United States, you can't even legally consume marijuana. The point of all this is that this is not based on any evidence about maturity or ability. It's about culture. And interestingly enough, in Canada, you can join the military with your parents' consent in this country at the age of 16. A 16-year-old can fight and die for Canada, but does not have a say in our politics. The same is true with permanent residents, who are also allowed to join our military and die for this country, but are not allowed to have a vote in their school board or municipal elections. So simply put, if you can die for a country, you should be allowed to vote in their elections. Now, we would not be new to this. In fact, many countries in the world are way ahead of us. Austria, Scotland, and Wales already allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. So does Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, and certain provinces of Germany. Even the BC legislature is examining lowering the voting age, and Toronto allows 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in polls at their neighborhood level on planning and policy issues. And this year, and this is major, the United Kingdom Parliament is debating to change their national voting rules to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote there. So why do we need to make this change? Well, in the last City of Winnipeg municipal election, only 37% of eligible voters actually came out to vote. And it's not much better in provincial elections. That's only about 55%. In federal elections, which have the highest voting turnout in the country, it's 60 to 65%. And that number is trending down. So we know that young people are less likely to vote, that poor and marginalized Canadians are less likely to vote. A municipal or school board election where a supermajority of 63% of the voting population does not vote loses its legitimacy. Now, that's a crisis in democracy, and we absolutely need to address it. So first thing I want to talk about is why give permanent residents to vote? Now, we are a province that has been built as a refuge for people. Many people start living in Manitoba as refugees or newcomers, and they stay and build their life here, and their children and their children's children do so. And my family story is very much typical of many Manitobans. My mother came to Winnipeg as a displaced person or a refugee fleeing World War II devastated Ukraine. Our family was liberated from a Nazi work camp, and they made their way to Winnipeg, and they began their life here. And of course, we've now a number of generations living in this province. And many Manitoban families are fleeing war, religious persecution, or just simply are economic refugees. And they found in Manitoba a safe harbor from conflict, and they start over. And allowing permanent residents a say in their children's school and in their cities, we are signaling that they are part of our community, that they are valued, that they have a voice in our future. And it's a major step in integrating a whole new generation of Manitobans. People argue, well, why can't they just become Canadians? And oftentimes, many permanent residents can't become citizens because it would mean giving up citizenship in their birth country. And for families and relatives who need them, who are being looked after at them, where they're shuffling back and forth from, Manitoba to their birth country in order to look after extended family members, they need to retain their citizenship to get in quickly and easily into their countries. And it may not always be easy to do that with a foreign passport. You may need a visa and other sort of bureaucratic complications to get in to see your family. So we've heard many stories from permanent residents who say it's not always easy to become a Canadian citizen. There's a cost. And of course, they have these larger family issues. And despite that, they may spend their entire life in Manitoba and die here and own property and businesses and employ Manitobans and yet not get a say in the local politics of this community. So then people ask, well, why give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote? Well, we know that the worst voting demographic is 18 to 24-year-olds. We also know that voting is habit forming. Like any civic skill, it has to be learned and someone teaches it to you. When you have a youth voting in a structured environment during a school year, most elections would be held during the fall and in coinciding with school. It would also coincide with teaching opportunities. You would have mass engagement and excitement in the schools, and you would have the structure of a public education system and a school board that would walk young people through their first voting experience. You'd also have the experience of positive peer pressure. You would have everybody excited and interested and active. And we know that once young people vote for the first time, they are more likely to vote again and again in their lives. And the problem is just getting them to vote the very first time. Now, research from Germany and Austria has found that 16 and 17-year-olds tend to be just as qualified as older voters in making voting choices, that they take it seriously, that they receive a good education on political issues. Arguably, if 16 and 17-year-olds are in a school environment during an election, they will be the best and most informed voters in the election, and they will know much more sophisticated analysis of the actual issues than their parents. So right now, when most elections come around, people are 18 or 19 years old. They're not in school. They don't have positive peer pressure to vote. There's no structured learning environment. There's no sort of mentoring or assisting to get them to the polls. And they may be, working first jobs or, busy with school, and it doesn't become a priority for them. And unless, of course, their family is engaged, the family takes on that mentoring role and gets their young people to the polls. Many families and young people don't have that, and that mentoring doesn't happen. There's certainly a concern between sort of right-leaning voters that young people are disproportionately going to sway the electorate, and that they disproportionately have progressive views on politics. Now, those are myths. 16 and 17-year-olds make up less than 5% of the population. That's not enough to change the vote in any significant way. And 16 and 17-year-olds tend to have similar voting patterns as older voters. They don't vote uniformly or en masse for one party or another, and they're often influenced by the family voting patterns of their parents. And reverse is also likely to be true. It's the 16 and 17-year-olds who will actually influence their parents. Their parents aren't currently voting, and if it becomes a big deal for their 16 and 17-year-old to vote for the first time, you can bet that they will be dragging a lot of reluctant parents to the polls who wouldn't otherwise be going to vote, who will sort of, for lack of a better word, feel shamed into being a good model for their children, who are very excited, and it becomes important for them. And you will actually see an uptick in voter turnout. Now, a third of the 16-year-olds have employment in this province. That means they pay taxes and they get no say where their taxes go. And of course, we trust 16-year-olds to drive vehicles, and vehicles are dangerous, and they are some of the leading causes of injury in our community. So if we trust them to do that, to operate potentially a deadly vehicle that could hurt somebody, we obviously can trust them to vote. And parents will be copying and modeling the behavior from their children. If their children are voting, they will have no excuse. They will have to vote. And it's been shown in places like Austria that younger voters are more connected to the democratic institutions and political parties and more satisfied with democracy. And in this time of growing authoritarianism, we need more young people engaged in fighting for our democratic institutions. And this is but one tool in the toolbox. It also will address inequality of who votes. Elections are skewed to the oldest members of the community, and they tend to be wealthier. The youth voice has been missing from politics, and obviously young people are financially worse off than older, more established Manitobans. So more young voters would spark more interest and engagement from politicians to address their issues, and we would get more of a rounded debate, and we would have more voices in our politics. And of course, in the case of school board elections, young voters will have a direct say in how their schools are run, which means school boards will be more attentive to the people they ultimately serve. So this is about fairness. This is about inclusion. This is about Manitoba recognizing at municipal level that every resident needs to have a voice. And it's about getting youth and permanent residents engaged in our democracies and making our democracies more representative. All right, we're back, and I want to welcome Carolina Meneses Zamora. She is with the Immigration Winnipeg Partnership, and we're here talking about electoral reform, newcomers, and municipal politics, and should they have the right to vote. So welcome, Caroline. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, it's our honor and our pleasure. So I'm wondering if you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Immigration Winnipeg Partnership. What do you guys do, and who do you represent, and what do you advocate for?
Yes, as you mentioned, my name is Carolina Meneses Zamora. I work as a project manager for Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. We're an organization that is hosted by Social Planning Council of Winnipeg and funded by IRCC. And basically, our mandate is to support the integration of newcomers into the city of Winnipeg. In my role, our work is kind of divided into what we call sector tables. And in my case, I work with employment, and I also work with civic engagement and inclusion. So as part of that sector table, what we do is we bring together a lot of different stakeholders from different sectors, so we work with settlement organizations, universities, government at all levels. And what we do is that we bring together people to kind of tackle, discuss, and think about possible solutions to address different challenges that newcomers are facing while trying to integrate into the city.
Right. And so just to be really specific, what we're talking about is municipal politics and municipal elections. We're going to have a City of Winnipeg election next November. So it's almost a year away, so the clock's ticking. And I was a former school trustee with the Winnipeg School Division. This issue came to my radar about 10, 12 years ago when a delegation of newcomer groups, and I think Immigration Partnership Winnipeg was one of them, and they expressed concern. And at that time, there was about 80,000 Winnipeggers who were permanent residents. 10, 12 years later, I've been told now that number has grown to about 170,000 Winnipeggers who are permanent residents. So for those people who don't know immigration law, I'm wondering if you can explain the difference. What is the difference between being a citizen, being a permanent resident, and say being here on a work permit or a study visa? What does that mean if you're a permanent resident for immigration in Winnipeg?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's different immigration categories or streams, right? So for example, non-permanent residents or temporary residents are people who are granted opportunity to be in Canada, not permanently, right? So for a specific period. So for example, students, temporary workers are under that category. And then permanent residents are people who are given the right to live permanently in Canada. And when you become a permanent resident, you also have the responsibilities that come with living in Canada. So that means that you pay taxes, you need to kind of follow the law and things like that, right? So
and you can buy property and you pay property taxes, is that right?
Yes.
And so you live here permanently, your kids go to our schools, you use all public services, you can even serve in the Canadian military, isn't that right?
Yes, exactly.
All right. But the one thing you can't do is vote.
Yes.
And is that really the only difference between being a permanent resident and a Canadian citizen? Is there any other sort of rights that a Canadian citizen have outside of voting that a permanent resident wouldn't have?
I believe that the other biggest difference is the passport.
Okay.
You do not hold a Canadian passport. So you hold a permanent resident card.
All right. So we have seen a huge immigration boost to Winnipeg and Manitoba over the past 10 years. And we have people who are permanently living in this province, and their children are raised and going to the schools, and they work and pay taxes and property taxes, and they aren't allowed to vote. Do you think that's right?
My opinion is that it is not right, in the sense that if we are talking about becoming a province that is inclusive and welcoming, we need to examine what does that mean? And at the level of politics and also at the practical level, right? So I believe that there is no reason for permanent residents to not be able to vote at the municipal level. And I think then we can discuss what are some of the arguments that people have against it. But yeah, if a person is allowed to work, to live, to buy property, if you're allowed to die for the country in the army, eventually, potentially, right? How come you're not allowed to vote?
Right. There's that sort of a cliche in politics no taxation without representation, yet you have permanent residents who pay income tax, who pay education property tax, who pay school taxes, and they don't get a say in their children's schools. They don't get a say in how their city is run, and they don't really have any voice in our politics, and they can't run for political office. I guess that would be another change.
Yes.
So what do you think about that? Do you think they should also have the ability to run for school board and run for city council?
Yes, I believe because they are the people they're part of our communities, right? They're also the people who are like experiencing and have the lived experience regarding services, regarding transportation, regarding education, right? Like, it's their kids, the ones who are going to school, for example, right? So I think it makes sense that people would be able to kind of have a say in how these things are run.
Okay. Now, your work is sort of newcomer integration. If newcomers were given, well, not newcomers, but they're permanent residents, are given the right to vote, how do you see that helping integration into our community?
Yeah, I think that the sense of belonging is something that is very important for newcomers. It's hard to immigrate, right? Myself, for example, I'm Costa Rican. I came here like 11 years ago, and there's always like this sense of you're trying to belong, but you don't belong. You're like in between countries, in between languages, and stuff like that, right? So I feel that if we want to support integration, you would make an effort to have people really integrating into different spheres of society, right? And one of those is having that power to raise your voice and also elect people, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think it would be fundamental to support the integration of newcomers.
Okay. Are newcomers and permanent residents interested in civic politics? And would this help them feel connected to Winnipeg or their local community and what's going on?
To be honest, part of the work that we also do is to try to strengthen the civic participation of newcomers, because I think that people are not very interested in the topic sometimes. And I think it's because basically also you cannot vote, right? So it's also people feel like they don't have that opportunity at the end of the day to make the decisions, but also because people are struggling with life, right? So for example, newcomers, like they're working, they are trying to figure out school for their kids and stuff like that. So part of the work that we're doing is also try to strengthen the participation of immigrants or newcomers into politics. So, for example, whenever there's like an election, we have like what we call a Got Citizenship, Go Vote campaign, where we basically are trying to deliver information, like nonpartisan information to the immigrant communities about like what's happening, how can you vote, why is it important to vote. And I think that one of the things that we often see is that people do not trust the electoral systems. And sometimes it's because they come from countries where their democracy is like broken or non-existent. So part of the work that we need to do is also to deliver, and I wouldn't say educate in the sense that these people need to be educated, but like being able or like open spaces where people can access the information about like, okay, how is the political system working in Canada and what is in there for you, right? Like if you participate, what is it that you can do? So I think that voting would be obviously like a very, very important motivation for people to be able to integrate to politics.
Right. Well, and just to be clear, Canadian citizens in the last municipal City of Winnipeg election, only 37% came out to vote. So the majority of Winnipeggers who are Canadian citizens did not vote in the last civic election, and that number gets worse every election, not better. And do you think by adding 170,000 people to the voter rolls, is that going to be a good thing for turnout for our democracy? Will it breathe new life? What, if any, impact will it have on our current civic politics?
Yes, definitely. I just want to clarify that of those 170,000 people, maybe not everybody would vote because some of them might be under 18.
Right.
But still, like we believe there's like thousands of people who would be able to vote. And for example, we have discussed transportation, the use of the bus system, right? Like it's something that newcomers rely heavily on, but they don't have a say, for example, at the municipal level on that, right? So that's one of the things that we try to often do is try to explain people like, okay, if we are talking about municipal elections, what is this exactly that we're talking about? And I believe that people want to participate and people have the knowledge that decision makers need to improve these for systems, for example, right? People are the ones who are riding the buses, for example, right? They do know, right? So one of the arguments that people often have is that people haven't lived long enough in Canada to understand Canada. And that's why they shouldn't be voting, for example, right? But like, you're the one using the system, it's lived experience. And I think that sometimes we oversee lived experience as a very important source of knowledge.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, in your opinion, do you think current municipal and school board officials are sufficiently focused on the issues that newcomers and permanent residents have in our city, in our province? And do you think by giving them the right to vote that would certainly focus their attention a lot more on those issues than they're currently getting paid to now?
Yes, I think that newcomer and immigration issues are fundamental. As you were saying, a large percentage of the city of Winnipeg's population are immigrants, right? And by immigrants, I'm also talking about people who maybe are first generation or people who are here on different status that is not permanent residents, right? But like a large percentage, I believe it's like 29%. So it's a big chunk of the population, right? So immigration for sure plays a vital role in the growth of the city of Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
There's I would say 29% approximately of the population of the city is immigrant or has an immigrant background. So I think that immigration is one of those topics that politicians cannot ignore. People are here, people will continue coming here. And I think that moving forward and thinking in terms of how can we have systems in place to really integrate these voices into our communities, it's fundamental.
Okay. Now, in my research, I don't know of any jurisdiction that has allowed permanent residents to right to vote in municipal and school board elections. I'm just going to check in with you. Do you know of anyone, or would we in Manitoba be breaking new ground here and we would be a leader on this issue?
Yeah, I know that there was some efforts in different provinces.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Ontario was discussing it. New Brunswick was very, very close. So part of the work that we do is also try to partner with these other organizations around the country to see how are they tackling this issue. So my understanding is that still there's none. Any of the cities have approved.
Okay. So if Manitoba and Winnipeg did this, we would be leaders in the country.
Yeah, and it would be a great example of integration, not only as a narrative, but in a practical level, right? Like in a systemic level.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've already mentioned one of the issues. You said not obviously there's people that disagree with this and they think that you should be a Canadian citizen to vote. And one of the arguments you were saying was that people hadn't been here long enough to sort of know the issues. And I think you dealt with that quite candidly. Is there any other sort of criticisms that you've been hearing as to why people would be opposed to giving permanent residents the votes in local elections?
Yes, I think that apart from that, the other argument that we often hear is that then people will not become citizens. And I think that it is important to understand that civic participation, or if people get involved and people learn and understand why is it important to get involved, people will be motivated to become citizens. And there's research that has been done about that. Right. So instead of stopping people from becoming citizens, it will motivate people to become citizens.
That's very interesting. I've heard, though, that oftentimes people may live in Winnipeg their entire life, raise a family and, have a house and pay taxes for their whole life and never get their citizenship because they have ties to their birth country. And it may be very difficult to get in and out of the birth country, and they have relatives and family there that they have to take care of. And that if they become Canadian citizens, they have to give up their citizenship in their birth country. And that would make it extremely difficult and hard for them to manage their responsibilities in the old country. And that sort of prevents them from becoming citizens, even if they were so inclined. Have you heard stories like that? Or is there sort of structural barriers for people becoming citizens?
Definitely. I think a lot of people, they do not want to lose their citizenship in other countries, but it's also becoming a citizen is a costly and lengthy process, right? And if you have gone through so what happened sometimes is that people will come here as a non-permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, for example, you will come here with a study permit, right? And then you will go through the process to become a permanent resident, which is a very lengthy, overwhelming process. So I feel that for the time people become permanent residents, you're tired. And then you also have to pay, right? So I believe right now it's like maybe $600 to $800 to become a citizen. So yeah, I think it's also like a lengthy process, costly, and not everybody is able to go through it, right? So, and even if you're going to go through it, let's say like you have to wait 3 years after you become a permanent resident to become a citizen or to apply for citizenship. Those 3 years that you're here, you're still contributing, right? You're still being part of the community. So why aren't you able to have a voice during that time?
Right. So just to give some people timelines, you come to Canada, what are sort of averages about just you come here initially for either school or work, and then you stay, and then you apply for permanent residence, and then you get that. And then I think you've talked a little bit about how long it takes to get your citizenship after that. So what would it be like for most people from just landing in Canada to becoming a citizen? How many years would that take?
I cannot tell you because I think each case is different. I can tell you about my case. I'm
Sure.
a permanent resident, and it took me 10 years.
10 years.
And I'm still not a citizen.
Right. And you've applied?
No.
No? Okay.
I can apply now, but I guess this is part of why I think it's like important to talk about people's lived experiences, right? And when I'm talking about this is, well, I have lived it, but so for example, I came as an international student, went through my master's, did all the process of postgraduate work permit, then COVID happened, and when I was applying for my permanent residency, so yeah, I have to wait like 3 years to get my permanent residency, right? And then 3 years to be able to apply for Canadian citizenship. So now I can apply, but it's overwhelming, right? And I think that's specifically my case. There's people who get their PR faster. So I think it's like a case by case.
Right. But the point to be made is that you could be living, paying taxes here for 10 years and not have a voice in the local politics.
Yes, contributing, like lots of these people, we also have to remember that they're like frontliners, right? Like they fill critical work gaps in the healthcare system, in the trades, right? So it's people who are there day by day working hard.
Right.
Right. So,
well, and I want to talk about that because Manitoba has really good at attracting people, newcomers and permanent residents. We're not so good at keeping them. And there's a pattern of people coming here, they start their life here, and then they move to another part of Canada. And they may have gone through our schools and our training systems, and Manitoba taxpayers subsidize that only to see them move to another province. If we made this move to allowing permanent residents to vote, do you think that would have a positive impact in keeping people here and integrating more newcomers in Manitoba?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think that people will feel and experience a true sense of belonging, right? I think that there is always, as I was mentioning before, like this like in-between worlds for immigrants. People are always kind of like trying to integrate here while like missing back home, trying to figure out life here. People have kids here who are Canadians, right? So I think it would definitely have an impact.
Okay. Now, you were in the House last week when I brought Bill 211, the Voter Eligibility Act, where I was trying as an MLA to change the law in Manitoba to grant permanent residents the right to vote. The Canoe government voted against the bill and basically shot it down. What is your reaction to that, if any?
I think that for us, it's just important to keep advocating, keep like talking about the topic and keep having these kind of discussions with people, right? And like always being like open to discuss it with people who are against. I think it is important to find spaces where people can have dialogues about topics that might be uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, our work, Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, will keep advocating for integration of newcomers in different like spheres of society.
Okay, so you'll keep fighting for this.
Yes.
All right. Well, best of luck, and I will help as best as I can. So thank you, Carolina Meneses Zamora, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So I want to give you an update about Bill 211, the Voter Eligibility Act. It was debated in the House last week, and as you may have guessed, Wab Kinew's government was opposed to it and voted against it, killing that bill. Disappointed, but not surprised. The Kinew government has not been a strong proponent of democracy inside or outside the Manitoba NDP, and it hasn't shown a strong support for young people, newcomers, or ethnocultural communities either. But the fight will go on, and those that believe in a fair, more inclusive Manitoba, we play the long game, and we're going to continue to advocate on this issue. So that's the pod for this week. I want to thank Carolina Meneses Zamora from Immigration Partnership Winnipeg for sharing her story with us. And it highlights why we need to change our voting laws in Manitoba and make them modern, and to stop the decline of voter participation and improve voting rights for all Manitobans. If you agree, share your thoughts with the Premier Wab Kinew. You can reach the Premier at premier@manitoba.ca. Tell them we need to lower the voting age and allow permanent residents the right to vote. And we'd love to hear your feedback on the pod. Please reach out to us. We are on all the socials. You can also reach us directly at mark@markwasiliumla.ca.